The rain drummed against the windows of the small roadside diner, like impatient fingers tapping on glass. Inside, the warm glow of yellowed lights created a cozy bubble against the storm outside. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with grilled onions and bacon filled the air, while an old radio in the corner played soft blues music that seemed to match the weather. Lauren Williams wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, her movements automatic after years of working the night shift. Her name tag was slightly crooked, and her dark curls had escaped from her ponytail hours ago, but she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who took pride in her work. At 26, she had been working at Murphy's Diner for almost 4 years, ever since she moved to this small town looking for a fresh start. The bell above the door chimed softly as a man stepped inside, shaking raindrops from his jacket. Lauren glanced up and felt her breath catch slightly. The newcomer was massive, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorframe and arms that strained against his casual shirt. His face was kind but weathered, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Evening," the man said, his voice deep and warm. "Pretty nasty night out there." Lauren smiled, grateful for a friendly customer. "It sure is. What can I get you tonight?" "Double burger, fries, and a coffee." "Black." He settled into a corner booth, and Lauren noticed how he positioned himself, with a clear view of both the entrance and the back exit. There was something about him that felt familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. As she jotted down his order, Lauren felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. It was almost 10 o'clock, which meant they would be coming soon. They always came around this time, when most of the other customers had gone home and the diner was quiet. She had been dealing with Rick Dawson and his crew for 6 months now. It started small at first, crude comments, lingering stares, requests for free coffee that weren't really requests. But over time, it had escalated. They began demanding money, calling it protection fees, for keeping the diner safe. When she refused, things got broken. Windows cracked mysteriously. Deliveries went missing. Other customers stopped coming around. Lauren had thought about calling the police, but Rick had made it clear what would happen if she did. He knew where she lived, where she shopped, what route she took home each night. In a town this small, there was nowhere to hide from someone who wanted to find you. The customer in the corner booth seemed to sense her unease. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Lauren forced a smile and nodded. "Just tired. Long shift." She turned toward the kitchen to place his order, but her hands were shaking slightly as she clipped the ticket to the line. Outside, the storm was getting worse. Thunder rolled across the sky like bowling balls, and the wind rattled the old building's frame. The few remaining customers, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a young couple sharing a slice of pie, and a trucker nursing his third cup of coffee, seemed content to wait out the weather. But Lauren knew the storm outside was nothing compared to what was coming. She had tried everything she could think of to avoid this confrontation. She had saved up money from tips, thinking maybe she could just pay them and make them go away. But every time she gave them what they wanted, they came back asking for more. Last week, Rick had gotten more aggressive, grabbing her wrist when she hesitated to hand over the cash register's contents. The bruises had faded, but the memory hadn't. As she prepared the stranger's coffee, Lauren found herself studying him in the reflection of the coffee pot. There was something about his presence that made her feel slightly safer, though she couldn't explain why. He had the build of someone who could handle himself, and the way he carried himself suggested he had seen trouble before. The coffee finished brewing with a soft gurgle, and Lauren poured it into a clean mug. Her reflection in the dark liquid looked tired and scared, and she hated what she saw. When had she become this person? When had she started living her life in fear? Growing up, her grandmother had always told her to stand up for herself, to never let anyone make her feel small. But her grandmother had never faced men like Rick Dawson. She had never been alone in a small town where everyone was too afraid to help. The bell above the door chimed again, but this time the sound seemed different, sharper, more ominous. Lauren looked up and felt her blood run cold. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see the distinctive shape of motorcycles parked outside. They were here. Lauren's hands began to shake as she set down the coffee pot. The customer in the corner booth looked up from his menu, his expression shifting as he noticed her reaction. Even the other patrons seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, their conversations dropping to whispers. The door handle turned slowly, and Lauren knew that everything was about to change. Tonight would be different from all the other nights. She could feel it in the air, like the electric charge before lightning strikes. Whatever was about to happen, there would be no going back. The door exploded open with a violence that made the entire diner shake. The old bell above the entrance didn't just ring, it screamed, clanging against the frame as 5 men stormed inside like a force of nature. The warmth that had filled the diner moments before was instantly sucked out, replaced by something cold and predatory. Rick Dawson led the pack, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. At 45, he was built like a linebacker who had gone to seed. His leather jacket stretched tight across a barrel chest. A jagged scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, a souvenir from a bar fight years ago that had only added to his reputation. His pale blue eyes swept the diner with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he owned everything he looked at. Behind him, his crew spread out like wolves flanking their alpha. There was Tommy Chip Morrison, a wiry man whose nickname came from the permanent gap where his front tooth used to be. Next to him stood Carlos Mendez, his neck covered in tattoos that disappeared beneath his collar, each one telling a story of violence. The other two, Jake Beef Sullivan and Danny Wright, were muscle, pure and simple, their knuckles scarred from years of making other people's problems disappear. The few customers in the diner immediately understood the threat. The elderly man folded his newspaper with shaking hands, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. The young couple huddled together in their booth, the woman gripping her boyfriend's arm. Even the trucker, a man who had seen his share of rough crowds, suddenly found his phone very interesting. But it was Lauren who felt the full weight of their attention. Rick's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of a man who had never met real resistance. "Look what we have here. Our favorite little waitress, still pretending this place actually belongs to her." Lauren's knuckles went white as she gripped the edge of the counter. She had played this scene in her mind 100 times, practicing what she would say, how she would stand up to them. But now, faced with 5 men who radiated violence like heat from a furnace, all her rehearsed courage evaporated. "We're closed," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. Chip laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Closed? But your sign says you're open 24 hours. You're not trying to lie to us, are you, sweetheart?" Rick approached the counter with deliberate slowness, each step calculated to build tension. He placed both hands flat on the surface, leaning forward until Lauren could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the yellow stains on his teeth. "You know why we're here," he said softly. "Same reason we come every week. You've got something that belongs to us." "I don't owe you anything," Lauren replied, but her voice came out smaller than she intended. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Rick's smile widened, but his eyes went flat and cold. "See, that's where you're wrong, girl. This diner sits on our territory. These roads, this whole damn county, it's ours. Which means anyone doing business here pays us for the privilege." Carlos had wandered over to the jukebox, running his fingers along its surface like he was appraising it. "Nice music box you got here," he said conversationally. "Be a real shame if something happened to it." In the corner booth, the large stranger had gone very still. Lauren noticed that his hands, which had been casually wrapped around his coffee mug, were now flat on the table. His posture had shifted subtly, like a cat preparing to spring. Rick noticed her glance and followed it, his attention fixing on the man in the booth for the first time. "Well, hello there, friend," he called out. "Don't mind us. Just conducting a little business with the lady here." The stranger didn't respond, but Lauren saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Rick turned back to her, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Now, where were we? Oh yes, you were about to open that register and give us what we're owed." "I'm not giving you anything," Lauren said, finding a spark of defiance she hadn't known was still there. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rick's expression darkened, and the casual mask slipped away to reveal something much more dangerous underneath. "Is that so?" he said quietly. "Boys, I think our little waitress here needs a reminder about how things work in our town." Jake moved to the window and flipped the open sign to closed, while Danny positioned himself by the door. Carlos picked up a salt shaker from a nearby table and began tossing it casually from hand to hand, the threat implicit. "Last chance," Rick said, reaching across the counter toward the register. "You can do this easy, or you can do this hard. But either way, you're going to do it." Lauren stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had always known this moment would come, when Rick's patience finally ran out and the pretense of civility disappeared entirely. She was alone, outnumbered, and terrified. But then Rick's hand moved toward her wrist, and everything changed. Before his fingers could make contact, another hand shot out from seemingly nowhere, wrapping around Rick's wrist with crushing force. The biker leader's eyes went wide with shock and pain as he found himself unable to move, caught in a grip that felt like it could snap bones. "I don't think she wants you touching her," said a deep, calm voice. Rick turned his head slowly, following the massive arm up to a face he suddenly recognized. The color drained from his cheeks as understanding dawned. "Holy shit!" Chip whispered from across the room. "That's John Cena." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and Rick's labored breathing as he struggled against the iron grip on his wrist. Everything was about to change. The recognition hit the room like a physical force. John Cena, the man who had entertained millions, who had become a symbol of never giving up, who children looked up to as a real-life superhero, was sitting in their small-town diner, and he was not happy with what he was seeing. Rick's face cycled through a series of expressions: shock, fear, and then, dangerously, wounded pride. Being manhandled in front of his crew by anyone was humiliating, but being overpowered by a celebrity made it 10 times worse. In his world, reputation was everything, and right now his was being destroyed by a grip that felt like a mechanical vice. "Let go of me," Rick hissed through clenched teeth, trying to twist free. But Cena's hand didn't budge an inch. "You first," Cena replied calmly. "Take your hands off the lady and step back." For a moment, Rick seemed to consider compliance. The rational part of his brain was screaming that picking a fight with John Cena was career suicide. But Rick Dawson hadn't built his reputation by being rational. He had built it by never backing down, no matter the odds. With his free hand, Rick suddenly swung at Cena's face. It was a sucker punch, thrown with all the desperate fury of a man whose authority was crumbling before his eyes. But Cena had seen it coming from a mile away. He released Rick's wrist and leaned back, the punch sailing harmlessly through the air where his head had been a second before. "Big mistake," Cena said quietly. Rick stumbled backward, off balance from his missed swing, and that's when his crew decided to even the odds. Chip was the first to move, grabbing a chair and swinging it at Cena's back. But the WWE superstar spun around with surprising speed for such a large man, catching the chair in mid-swing and ripping it from Chip's grasp. The chair exploded against the wall in a shower of splinters. Carlos came next, pulling a switchblade from his boot and lunging forward with practiced precision. The blade flashed under the diner's lights as it arced toward Cena's ribs. Lauren screamed a warning, but Cena was already moving. He sidestepped the attack, grabbed Carlos's wrist, and twisted sharply. The knife clattered to the floor as Carlos cried out in pain, and then Cena's other hand shot out, delivering a devastating punch to the man's solar plexus that lifted him off his feet. Carlos crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Jake and Danny rushed Cena simultaneously from opposite sides, thinking their combined weight would be enough to overwhelm him. They couldn't have been more wrong. Cena dropped low, sweeping Danny's legs out from under him, while simultaneously driving his elbow into Jake's midsection. Danny hit the floor hard, his head bouncing off a table leg, while Jake doubled over retching. The entire exchange had taken less than 10 seconds. Rick watched his crew being systematically dismantled and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine fear. This wasn't like the bar fights and street brawls he was used to. This was a professional athlete, a man who had trained his entire life to be a human weapon, and Rick suddenly realized he was completely out of his league. But pride is a dangerous thing, and Rick had too much of it to back down now. "You think you're hot shit," Rick snarled, pulling brass knuckles from his jacket pocket. "This ain't your fancy wrestling ring, pretty boy. Out here, I make the rules." Cena looked at the brass knuckles and shook his head sadly. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Rick charged forward, swinging the brass knuckles in a wide arc aimed at Cena's temple. It was a move that had ended dozens of fights in his favor, delivering knockout power that few men could withstand. But Cena wasn't just any man. He ducked under the swing, stepped inside Rick's guard, and wrapped his arms around the biker's waist. For a split second, Rick felt himself being lifted off the ground, and then the world turned upside down. Cena executed a perfect suplex, driving Rick headfirst into the diner floor with tremendous force. The impact shook the entire building, rattling dishes on their shelves and causing the lights to flicker. Rick's body went limp, the brass knuckles rolling away from his nerveless fingers. The diner fell silent except for the groans of the fallen bikers and the continued drumming of rain on the roof. Lauren stood frozen behind the counter, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. She had seen wrestling matches on television, but witnessing Cena's power up close was something entirely different. It was like watching a force of nature in human form. Chip, who had been the first to attack, tried to crawl toward the door. Blood streamed from his broken nose, and his movements were unsteady. "This ain't over," he wheezed. "Rick's got friends. They're gonna—" His words were cut off as Cena's boot came down on his back, pinning him to the floor. "It's over," Cena said firmly. "For all of you." Danny had managed to pull himself to his hands and knees, but one look at Cena's face convinced him that moving was a bad idea. Jake was still curled in a ball, holding his stomach and making soft whimpering sounds. Carlos lay motionless, his tattoos standing out starkly against his pale skin. And Rick wasn't moving at all. Lauren found her voice at last. Is he dead?" Cena knelt beside Rick and checked his pulse. "He's alive. Probably has a concussion, but he'll live." He looked up at Lauren, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her hands were still shaking. "I can't believe you just— I mean, they've been terrorizing this town for months, and you just—" "Sometimes bullies need to be reminded that they're not as tough as they think they are," Cena said simply. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, but inside the diner, the real tempest was just beginning. Rick's crew lay scattered across the floor like broken toys. Their reign of terror ended by one man who refused to let injustice slide. But as Cena would soon learn, some victories come with a price. The aftermath of the fight settled over the diner like dust after an explosion. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, mixing with shattered plates and overturned salt shakers. The jukebox sat at an odd angle against the wall, its power cord yanked from the socket during the chaos. The smell of spilled coffee and fear hung in the air, a bitter reminder of what had just transpired. Lauren moved carefully through the wreckage, her legs still unsteady from the adrenaline. Every few steps, she had to stop and lean against something solid, a chair, the counter, a booth, as the full weight of what had happened crashed over her in waves. For months, she had lived in terror of these men, and now they lay defeated on her diner floor like broken mannequins. John Cena stood in the center of the destruction, surveying the scene with the calm professionalism of someone who had been in countless high-stakes situations. But there was something in his eyes, a weariness that spoke to the cost of always being the one who had to step up, who had to be the solution to other people's problems. Rick was slowly regaining consciousness, his eyes fluttering open as he tried to focus on his surroundings. When memory returned, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. He attempted to sit up, but the movement sent waves of pain through his skull, and he collapsed back to the floor with a groan. "Stay down," Cena advised quietly. "You took a pretty hard hit." Rick's response was a string of profanities that would have made a sailor blush, but his words lacked their earlier venom. He was a beaten man, and everyone in the room knew it. The other customers who had witnessed the fight sat in stunned silence. The elderly man with the newspaper clutched it to his chest like a shield, his eyes wide with disbelief. The young couple huddled together, whispering urgently about whether they should leave or stay. The trucker had his phone out, but his hands were shaking too badly to dial. Lauren finally found her voice. "I need to call the police," she said, reaching for the old rotary phone behind the counter. "Good idea," Cena agreed. "But first, are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" The question stopped her cold. "What do you mean?" Cena gestured toward Rick, who was now sitting up against an overturned table, holding his head in his hands. "Pressing charges means testifying in court. It means putting yourself in the spotlight. And it means these guys are going to hold a grudge." Lauren felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. In all the chaos, she had momentarily forgotten the most important fact about her situation. Rick Dawson wasn't just some random thug. He was connected to a larger network of criminals who wouldn't take kindly to one of their own being humiliated and arrested. "He's right," Rick said, looking up at her with bloodshot eyes. "You think this is over? You think just because your celebrity friend here got lucky you're safe?" He laughed, a harsh sound that made Lauren's skin crawl. "I got friends, girl. Serious friends. And they don't like it when people mess with family." "Shut up," Chip mumbled from his position on the floor, blood still trickling from his broken nose. But his warning came too late. Rick was on a roll now, his ego demanding that he salvage something from this disaster. "You press charges, and I guarantee you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. We got eyes everywhere in this county. We know where you live, where you shop, what route you take home every night." The threats hung in the air like poison gas, and Lauren felt her newfound courage beginning to waver. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, that standing up to them would only make things worse. But then she looked at the destruction around her, at the fear in the eyes of the other customers, at the broken men who had terrorized her community for months. And she thought about her grandmother's words. "Sometimes, baby girl, you got to stand up even when you're scared, especially when you're scared." "Make the call," she said firmly, picking up the phone. Cena nodded approvingly. "That's the right choice." As Lauren dialed 911, the door to the diner opened again. This time, it wasn't violent, just the careful entrance of someone who had seen the motorcycles outside and was trying to figure out what was happening. It was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment above the hardware store down the street. She took one look at the scene, the broken furniture, the groaning men on the floor, John Cena standing in the middle of it all, and her jaw dropped. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," she whispered. "What in the world happened here?" "These gentlemen were just leaving," Cena said diplomatically. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed as she recognized Rick and his crew. "About time someone put those hooligans in their place," she said with surprising venom. "They've been terrorizing decent folks for far too long." Her words seemed to break a dam. The trucker stood up from his booth, his phone finally steady in his hands. "I got the whole thing on video," he announced. "Every second of it." The young man from the couple in the corner booth cleared his throat nervously. I saw them threaten you last month," he told Lauren. "I wanted to say something then, but I was scared. I'm sorry." One by one, other voices joined in. The elderly man admitted he had seen the bikers vandalize the diner's windows. Mrs. Henderson revealed that they had been shaking down other businesses too. The trucker mentioned seeing them intimidate customers in the parking lot. It was as if the entire community had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to make the first move. Now that the dam had broken, the stories poured out. Months of fear, intimidation, and helplessness suddenly given voice. Rick's face grew paler with each testimony. His threats about friends and connections seemed less intimidating when faced with an entire community ready to stand together. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, and red and blue lights began to flash through the diner windows. Help was coming, and for the first time in months, Lauren wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. But she was about to learn that some battles, once started, have consequences that reach far beyond a single night. The police cars arrived like harbingers of justice, their flashing lights painting the rain-soaked parking lot in alternating shades of red and blue. Sergeant Mike Torres stepped out of the lead vehicle, his weathered face set in familiar lines of resignation. He had been expecting this call for months, not because he wanted trouble, but because he had seen the signs of a community pushed to its breaking point. Torres had been a cop in this county for 18 years, long enough to watch Rick Dawson's crew evolve from petty troublemakers into something more dangerous. He had arrested Rick twice before on minor charges, but nothing ever stuck. Witnesses disappeared, evidence went missing, and cases fell apart before they reached trial. It was the kind of corruption that ate at a good cop's soul. But tonight felt different. As Torres entered the diner, he took in the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had investigated hundreds of crime scenes. The broken furniture told a story of violence, but the positioning of the bodies suggested something more interesting. This hadn't been a chaotic brawl, but a systematic takedown by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. His eyes found John Cena standing near the counter, and Torres had to suppress a smile. In all his years on the force, he had never thought he would find himself taking a statement from a WWE superstar in a roadside diner fight. "Well," Torres said to his partner, a younger officer named Davis, "this is definitely going in the report as the strangest Tuesday night ever." Lauren stood behind the counter, still shaking, but visibly more composed now that help had arrived. She had spent the last 15 minutes giving her statement to Officer Davis, her voice growing stronger with each detail she recounted. For the first time in months, she wasn't trying to minimize what had happened or make excuses for her attackers. "They came in demanding money," she explained as Torres approached. "When I refused, they started threatening me, breaking things. They said they owned this town and that I had to pay them for protection." Torres nodded, jotting notes in his pad. "And Mr. Cena intervened when?" "When Rick tried to grab my wrist," Lauren said. "That's when John stepped in." Across the room, Rick was being helped to his feet by Officer Martinez, his hands cuffed behind his back. The fight had gone out of him entirely, replaced by the sullen resignation of a man who knew his luck had finally run out. His crew was in similar condition, Chip nursing his broken nose, Carlos holding his ribs, Jake and Danny moving like old men despite being barely 30. "You're making a mistake," Rick muttered to Torres as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You know I got connections. This won't stick." Torres looked him in the eye with the cold professionalism of a man who had heard every threat in the book. "Rick, in my 18 years as a cop, I've arrested you twice and had to let you walk both times. But tonight, you messed with the wrong people in front of too many witnesses." He gestured around the diner. "See all these folks? They're done being scared of you." And it was true. The transformation in the room was remarkable. Mrs. Henderson was giving her statement with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting years to tell this story. The trucker was showing his video footage to Officer Davis, pointing out specific moments where Rick's crew had committed clear crimes. Even the young couple was providing detailed testimony about previous incidents they had witnessed. But perhaps the most significant change was in Lauren herself. Gone was the frightened woman who had cowered behind the counter. In her place stood someone who had rediscovered her own strength, who had learned that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is refuse to be scared anymore. "I want to press full charges," she told Torres firmly. "Extortion, assault, destruction of property, making terroristic threats, everything." Torres smiled for the first time that night. "That's what I like to hear." As the bikers were led out to the patrol cars, Rick made one last attempt to intimidate Lauren. "This ain't over," he called out. "I got friends who—" "No," Cena interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down countless bullies in his life. "It is over. Your reign of terror in this town ends tonight." Rick started to respond, but one look at Cena's face convinced him to save his breath. He was loaded into the back of a patrol car, his empire of fear crumbling around him like sand castles in the tide. As the police cars pulled away, their sirens fading into the distance, the diner fell quiet for the first time that night. The immediate danger was over, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. Cena helped Lauren start cleaning up the worst of the damage, moving tables and sweeping up broken glass. They worked in comfortable silence, two people who understood that sometimes actions speak louder than words. "You know," Lauren said eventually, "I keep thinking about something my grandmother used to tell me. She said that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. Cena nodded, dumping a dustpan full of broken ceramic into the trash. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Lauren paused in her sweeping, looking around at the wreckage. I just wish she could have seen this, seen me finally standing up for myself. I think she did, Cena said quietly. I think she's been watching over you all along, waiting for you to find your strength. As if on cue, the old radio in the corner crackled back to life, playing a soft blues song that seemed to wrap around them like a warm embrace. The storm outside had passed, and through the windows, they could see the first hints of dawn painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Mrs. Henderson poked her head through the door. You two need any help cleaning up? Soon, other members of the community began arriving. Word had spread quickly through the small town, the way it always does when something significant happens, and people wanted to help. The young couple returned with cleaning supplies from the hardware store. The trucker brought coffee and sandwiches from the all-night gas station. Even some folks who had never set foot in the diner before showed up with mops and brooms. It became something more than just cleaning up after a fight. It became a community coming together, reclaiming what was theirs, refusing to let fear define them anymore. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, casting golden light through the repaired windows of the diner, Lauren stood behind the counter making fresh coffee for the volunteers. The place was still scarred from the night's events, but it felt different now. Not like a place under siege, but like a home being restored by people who cared. Cena sat at his original booth, finally eating the burger he had ordered so many hours ago. It was cold by now, but he didn't seem to mind. So what happens next? Lauren asked, refilling his coffee cup. Cena looked around at the community members who had rallied around her, at the new strength in her posture, at the hope that had replaced fear in her eyes. Next, he said, you live your life without being afraid. You run your diner, you take care of your customers, and you remember that you're stronger than you ever imagined. Lauren smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. I think I can do that. Outside, the world was waking up to a new day. Not just for the diner, not just for the town, but for everyone who had learned that sometimes, when the right person decides to stand up, everything can change. The battle was over. The healing could begin. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of Rick Dawson's motorcycles faded away forever, taking with them the reign of terror that had held this community captive for far too long. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came in the most unexpected forms, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, ordering a double burger with fries, and reminding everyone that real strength isn't about intimidation or fear. It's about standing up for what's right, even when, especially when, you're the only one willing to do it.